And good morning, sports today here on Sports Grid. I'm Craig Mish, along with Davis Maddock. Our fantasy football team previews continuing today here on the show. All bias aside, hopefully, because today we're taking a look at the Kansas City Chiefs, one of Davis's favorite squads. We're going to get into the fantasy aspects of a new look squad for the Chiefs, to be honest, this season, as their top playmaker over the last few years is now headed south to Miami. And Davis, good morning. I'm looking forward to doing this preview with you as we close in on the final games of the preseason.
Yeah, we are 2 weeks away from the beginning of the NFL season. We have preseason week 3. Remember, no preseason week 4. This is our last preseason action. The NFL gave us next weekend off so that we could have our, everyone could do their fantasy football drafts, next weekend. And very excited to talk about the Chiefs. Sort of, I think if you could get accurate projections for one team in order to win your fantasy football league, I think the new look Kansas City Chiefs would probably be the team you would choose.
Yeah, I agree. And, we're going to find a lot about Patrick Mahomes this season more than anything else. I think that that's the compelling part of this. But let's get to our headlines here on the show. We'll start off with Major League Baseball. George Kirby of the Seattle Mariners, who's probably headed to the postseason, threw a 24 consecutive strikes to start a game. Also, that quick graphic that you just showed there. We'll get back to that here in just a second. That's my bad on that. Tyron Smith out indefinitely with an avulsion fracture of the knee. Left tackle for Dallas is out. Probably the biggest story as far as injury is concerned today. Chet Holmgren suffered the Liz Frank injury and damaged his foot. He's going to miss the entire season. Ouch for Oklahoma City. The Utah Jazz trade Patrick Beverley to the Los Angeles Lakers for Talon Horton Tucker. And just to go back to that graphic real quick, the Miami Dolphins and Philadelphia Eagles had to postpone their dual practice today as the Dolphins had some issues with either food or some sort of stomach sickness. We're not really sure at this point. The Eagles are practicing on the Dolphins facility at the moment, but the Dolphins are not. Of course, these two teams will play against each other this weekend. So let's dive into a couple of things. Two big injuries. Let's do the football one first, what the Tyron Smith injury means for Dallas. Going into the season, I think that, losing your left tackle or right tackle is huge. And then obviously Chad Holmgren being out, I mean, that's a huge deal for Oklahoma City too, in terms of their win total.
Yeah, I mean it is not a good situation for the Dallas Cowboys. Their backup left tackle is a rookie, Matt Waletzko. Their right tackle, Terrence Steele, they probably don't want to switch him over. They could have they have this veteran guy, Josh Ball, who could play. But this is a huge injury because the Cowboys led the NFL in scoring last year. I think there's kind of this perception that the Cowboys were disappointing last season. Cassidy didn't really exceed. Amari was fine. Gallup got injured. Zeke obviously let down people who drafted him in the first round. But the Cowboys were a great offense. Now they don't have Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is not going to be ready to start the season. Ezekiel Elliott, he's just not that good anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be fascinating what Dak Prescott is able to do because this is probably the worst surrounding talent in terms of offensive line and wide receivers he's had. I believe he's entering into his 8th season starting in the NFL, maybe his 7th season. And he's played with a lot of great players. The offensive line in Dallas has always been amazing. They basically invest the offensive line at the highest rate in the NFL. And losing your all-pro left tackle 15 days before the start of the season, not what you want.
No, definitely not. Dallas will obviously have to plug that hole. Let's go to the NBA real quick. A couple of months away from the NBA starting up again. I know the Thunder have been in a bad spot in terms of current players, Davis, the last few years. They got a lot of draft picks, but boy, it looks like they're going to lose one of them at least to start the season. Looks like the entire season.
Yeah, and probably Oklahoma City. Maybe they were thinking like, okay, it would be fine if we made the play-in game this year. It'd be fine if we won 35 games this year. But Craig, there is a prospect. His name is Victor Wembanyama. He is a French big guy, and by big guy, I don't mean like a normal center. People say this kid is like 7'3", 7'4", but he can shoot threes. He can dribble. The tanking this season in the NBA is going to get completely out of control. And I am already salivating at the idea of Chet Holmgren, Victor Wembanyama, Lou Dort, and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander winning an NBA championship 4 or 5 years from now. So as a Thunder fan, I'm along for the ride. It stinks to not be able to see Chet play this season. I think that kind of very similar to Embiid. Embiid ended up missing that first season of his career. Now, obviously, I don't think Chet Holmgren is as good as Embiid, but Embiid joined the tanking 76ers, and then they started to build around him once they realized that he was good. And that's probably what the Thunder are hoping to do now.
Yeah, another tough season. Looks like for your Thunder coming up, but the future could be bright. Very interesting. I didn't know that about next year's draft, too. So something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on as well. All right. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be one of the favorites to win the AFC without a doubt, but they did lose a critical piece to their offense in the offseason as Tyreek Hill is now a member of the Miami Dolphins. So what does that mean for the Chiefs moving forward? We're going to learn a lot about which direction they head with one of the most dynamic players in the NFL no longer there. So I'm excited to talk about the Chiefs coming up next here on Fantasy Sports Today. For those of you who have an upcoming fantasy football draft, Davis and I are previewing one team every single day here on the show. And today happens to be Kansas City. A lot of players inside the top 200, some speculative players as well. Rookies at the running back position are being discussed. No doubt, stay on the grid for our preview of the Kansas City Chiefs. It is next here on FSP. Don't go away. Great.
Your heart's racing. The clock's running out. It all comes down to this. We're talking pregame. Pregame. Get locked in with Game Time Decisions. Your hosts, Gabe Morency and Cam Stewart, will get you ready for game time. Everything you need to know before a game goes off the board, with the bet slips to back it up. Make your best bet with live odds updates, late breaking news, up-to-the-minute injury reports, and real-time analytics from inside the sportsbooks. All the odds, all the action, from sports wagering insiders and industry pros like Donnie Rightside, Cam Lou, Cousin Sal, the Pro Football Doc, Dr. David Chow, and more. Get the winning edge every weekday afternoon from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, 3 to 4 Pacific. It's Game Time Decisions. Only on Sports Grid. The morning after.
What was your reaction to the Yankees taking Game 1 of the Subway Series last night, even up against Max Scherzer?
Let's work backwards. Started with Jonathan Loaisiga. They need to kind of piece together the closer situation. That was the thing that struck me. Of course, we can talk about Aaron Judge and, homer number 47 and all that cool stuff, but I want to talk about the setup guy that was having a down year that might turn into the closer down the stretch, because that's what, baseball is, right? It's all about the boring stuff.
The Sports Grid Network. Sports Grid, your 24/7 sports wagering network.
They play less games.
The early line.
Take a look at the top 4 seeds here in the Big Ten. They're going to play
Aaron
less.
Rodgers and
the morning
Russell
after.
Wilson. We saw movement in the marketplace like
Orlando
Fantasy
Magic.
Sports
The Cleveland
Today.
Cavaliers are a little thin as well.
Newswire.
Minus 160 favorite on the money line today for Arizona.
Pharrell Coast to
DBG,
Coast.
that's where they win cups. They win Stanley Cups over there. Give me the
Game
Penguins.
Time
Kind
Decisions.
of bizarre when you consider everybody is out for the Warriors.
In-game live
I
all
like
access.
I like Vandy against Bama. I think Vandy can win the game, take it 4.5.
In-game live, prime time.
the PGA champion.
In-game live, overtime.
All done before the final bet.
Get the winning edge. Only on Sports Grid.
welcome back to Fantasy Sports Today here on Sports Grid. One team a day is the recipe to success for us here on Fantasy Sports Today. But what will be the recipe for the Kansas City Chiefs? It is an interesting season, to say the least, for them. And Davis, naturally, we have seen some of the greatest players in the history of the game not matter who their players are on their teams in terms of quarterback. We've seen it before. Joe Montana, Steve Young, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. It didn't matter. Didn't matter who they had. They were winning championships. We're going to find out this year about Patrick Mahomes. Now, I'm not saying that he's not going to be in that category. I simply don't know. But when you remove a player like Tyreek Hill from the equation, I think you get that answer, and I think it's coming this year.
Yeah, I mean, count me in the camp of guys who thinks that Patrick Mahomes is, I think he's the best quarterback to ever play. Now, that doesn't mean someone won't be better than him. Starting at 22 years old, 4 straight conference championships, 4 straight division wins. He's unreal. He is 3rd all time in the NFL in adjusted yards per attempt. He is the fastest quarterback ever to 150 passing touchdowns. He, won MVP as a 23-year-old. I mean, he's unbelievable, right? And was Tyreek Hill a big part of that? Absolutely. I think that Mahomes' maturation, I think that their Super Bowl championship would have been harder to come by without the presence of Tyreek Hill. And I think a lot of their offense was predicated around what Tyreek Hill added. I certainly do not want to minimize his departure, but I think that the Kansas City Chiefs front office rightly looked at the situation and said Tyreek Hill is about to turn 29. His best asset is his speed. We can pay him, what did he end up getting, $26 million a year from the Miami Dolphins, or we can bring in 3 new guys, pay them all less combined per year than Tyreek Hill was asking, and kind of start a mini rebuild as they start paying Mahomes his massive, massive mega contract that takes up 20% of the Kansas City Chiefs cap space over the next 10 years. And I think they probably made the right decision.
We're going to find out. That's going to be the fun part this year, because if the Chiefs have a great year and they win 11, 12 games and their offense is at the top, you're going to be right. Patrick Mahomes is going to be one of the greatest. But what if he's not? I don't think we know the answer yet. So that's what's interesting for me. All right, let's take a look at the average draft position for the Chiefs. We have Mahomes going late 2nd, early 3rd round. Clyde Edwards-Helaire going 5th, 6th round. Isaiah Pacheco is one of the hot names in fantasy in best ball season. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be one of those players potentially to fill the role of Hill, although I believe he's been on and off the field. Skye Moore is another name that's gotten a lot of attention. And then Travis Kelsey, his ADP right now is 14. So he's going somewhere in the early part, usually, of the 2nd round of fantasy football drafts. But let's go back to Mahomes here for a minute. 37 touchdowns, 4,800 passing yards last season, and the 2nd quarterback basically taken in fantasy drafts. And if the numbers are the same this year, then he's going exactly where he should. So do you anticipate the numbers, Davis, being exactly the same?
I think there's a reasonable chance that he could actually be more effective this season than he was last season. So behind Tyreek Hill, the 3 wide receivers who played the most snaps on the Kansas City Chiefs were Demarcus Robinson, who signed with the Raiders, got cut, and is now with the Ravens. Byron Pringle, who moved on to the Chicago Bears this offseason and is reportedly playing as the 4th wide receiver for the Chicago Bears, and Mecole Hardman. The guys, those guys are not good. Let's just be honest about it. Demarcus Robinson, Mecole Hardman, they just not. I mean, they're fine, right? Especially in the context of playing with Patrick Mahomes. But now we're talking about Juju Smith-Schuster, who basically was the best 21-year-old wide receiver the NFL has ever seen. 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns as a 21-year-old. Backed it up with a great sophomore season, then started to battle with injuries a little bit, and just was not as good in his 3rd and 4th seasons. Re-signed the 1-year deal with the Steelers last year. The Chiefs reportedly wanted him last offseason as well, and I think that would have been a good addition for them to have made, but he went back to the Steelers. They add Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who has led the NFL in yards per reception twice and was a member of NFC Conference Championship teams, but just was never asked to play an expanded role in Green Bay, because that's what Rodgers does, right? If Rodgers decides, I don't trust that guy, he's not getting the ball. I think we are going to see a little bit different performance from him. And then they take Skye Moore in the 2nd round of the NFL draft, who was a lot of people's favorite prospect. And I'm not saying he should have gone in the first round because I don't think he should have, but he was an early to career prospect, super, super productive at Western Michigan, did well at the combine, good returns on him all offseason at Chiefs training camp. I think there's a lot of room for Mahomes to grow. And I think one of the biggest things we'll see is that I don't know if they trust any of these running backs, especially near the goal line. No one on the roster really. So I would not be surprised to see them be super pass heavy near the goal line either. Mahomes, in a lot of these drafts is going, honestly, falling quite a bit. I did an FFPC main event draft the other night where we got him in the middle of the 6th round. And I mean, that just feels like stealing to me. I mean, to get potentially the top quarterback in fantasy that late.
All right, well, let's go to the running backs this year, which is a huge question for the Chiefs, as they've liked to use multiple running backs. It was Darrell Williams and Damian Williams and Gore. And I mean, this year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it sort of feels like boom or bust for him in terms of maybe even being on the Chiefs. 500 rushing yards last year and 4 touchdowns. But my gosh, he's borderline RB2. He's being drafted like it. And, if you just basically watch, it's amazing, Davis. If you watch Clyde Edwards-Helaire's first NFL game, you would have thought he's headed straight to Canton. But that was probably the highlight of his career thus far.
Yeah, I mean, he had 27 touches in that game, did score a touchdown. But, honestly, I think a big part of his career turned in that game because they gave him 5 touches inside the 10-yard line. He got stoned on all of them, ended up scoring a receiving touchdown in that game. And if you believe Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there is at least something you can point to for one of his struggles in year 2. Again, this is him saying this, so unclear if it's true or not, but he told beat writers that last offseason he had a complication with his gallbladder and it ended up having to be removed. He said that he went into the 2021 Chiefs training camp at 160 pounds. It was like the worst he had ever felt. His body was like not cooperating with him, and that he basically just was not ready to play football. Now, you'd have to wonder, why did no one report on this last year? Why were we not made aware of this? Why did no one at Chiefs training camp bring this up? Why did Clyde Edwards-Helaire himself not bring this up? I think these are all very fair questions to ask, but it is at least sort of interesting. I mean, how many first-round running backs end up, did the teams give up on them? Like Josh Jacobs, the team has not given up on him. Travis Etienne, right. He's going to be the starting running back for the Jaguars after suffering the Liz Frank. If it's true that there's a reason to point to for Clyde Edwards-Helaire's struggles as a rusher last year, there's probably some chance that he actually is like a league-winning pick. For example, Kareem Hunt in 2018, before the Chiefs cut him, he had 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns in 11 games for the Chiefs that season, and we've pretty much been chasing that since. Everyone remembers how Damian Williams destroyed the 2019 playoffs, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl. So the production is there for someone to grab it. We just don't know if CH is capable, really.
All right, let's close it out with Isaiah Pacheco. Who is he, and does he stand in line to get multiple carries this upcoming season with both Williams no longer? I think, is Darrell Williams gone or is he back? I'm sorry.
Darrell Williams is gone. He is a member of the Arizona Cardinals. Ronald Jones and Jerick McKinnon are the other running backs in the Chiefs' backfield. Pacheco, honestly, a terrible prospect from Rutgers, was not good. Not a good pass catcher. Does not have great vision as a. I don't really get it. I'm firmly in the camp of not really getting this fascination with Pacheco from the Chiefs' perspective. But as we just said with CH, it doesn't really matter how good these guys are as long as they're on the field.
Interesting there. Yeah, a lot of Pacheco talk for sure this preseason, no doubt. All right, coming up next, we dive into their all-world tight end and Travis Kelsey. Where should you be taking him in your upcoming fantasy football draft? And then who replaces Tyreek Hill? Where are these targets going from Patrick Mahomes on the outside? We'll discuss that next, right here as our Chiefs preview continues on Fantasy Sports Today.
The morning after.
Baker Mayfield, the starting quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. Now, Kev, we know that week 1 opener for the Panthers is against Baker's former team. What do you make of the storylines for Baker Mayfield entering that Week 1 opener as the starter in Carolina?
You know, Baker is such a storyline guy, right? Such a narrative guy. It couldn't have been anybody other.
The Sports Grid Network.
You might be the next daily fantasy millionaire. No matter what you watch or where you play, learn from the world's best DFS players. Lineup building tools, expert projections, and advanced stats change the way you play the game. Dominate the competition. DailyRoto.com, the player's choice.
Pharrell, coast to coast.
This is yet, I'm told, at least the fourth different offense that Mayfield has to learn as a professional in his 5 years. And from the very start, Pharrell, they kind of knew it. I'm told after 2 weeks, he was so dominant over Darnold. It wasn't bad, but the fact of the matter is his timing was good. I'm told a couple of the throws are a little bit high. They feel that the timing will be better as these guys work together.
The Sports Grid Network. Fantasy Sports Today.
The running back that appears to make the biggest jump maybe in the last 2 months, maybe in all of fantasy, honestly, Davis, is Damian Pierce, who played for the University of Florida. And the beef that went on at Florida, Davis, is that people wanted to see him get the ball more. He really was never a primary running back at Florida. He's sort of a throwback guy in the sense that you give him the ball, he's never going to lose yards.
The Sports Grid Network. The Early Line.
The team that's got a lot of people excited, Nebraska. The second best odds to win the Big Ten West. Donnie, last year this team won 3 football games. Only 1 win in Big Ten play.
But if you're looking like a team total guy like myself, even a win total guy, you're going to be looking at Nebraska saying something has to change, and maybe the quarterback change is what they needed.
Only on Sports Grid.
Pro Football Doc has found its new home right here with Sports Injury Central. And with that comes our expansion into other sports. Sports Injury Central will give you nonstop exclusive injury analysis from experienced team doctors from all 3 major sports. Doctors with resumes that include teams like the Chicago Bulls, the Texas Rangers, and the LA Chargers. So gain a fantasy, DFS, and betting edge right now for free at SIZscore.com.
Great.
We continue our team preview of the Kansas City Chiefs in 2022. For those of you who missed the beginning part of our preview, which included their quarterback Patrick Mahomes and their running back situation, you can catch it on demand on our YouTube page or over on sportsgrid.com. Let's take a look at the average draft position for the NFFC. For those of you getting ready to make your picks this weekend, Travis Kelsey goes in the first round in some leagues, but mostly second round. His ADP is 14. Mahomes is at 32. Edwards-Helaire, 67. Juju Smith-Schuster, 80. And then Skye Moore at 142. Now, naturally, Davis, you've had a lot of nice things to say about Juju Smith-Schuster, and we like him a lot. He's a really fun, good guy, but we got to call it how it is, man. This guy has had a really hard time staying on the field. This goes for last year, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean, you follow this closer than me, but has he taken any snaps at all with the Chiefs in this preseason or even in their training camp?
Yeah, he was out there for a little bit in week 1, and he's been dealing with this like knee thing for I think like the last 10 or 11 days. The team doesn't seem too concerned about it. Smith-Schuster has been doing individual drills at practice. We are not raising the alarm on this yet. He did only play in 5 games last season. I do think his demise a little overstated. For example, in 2020, 16 games, 97 receptions, 850 yards, 9 touchdowns. I think by the sounds of what people think about Smith-Schuster as he entered into free agency, I think there was sort of the idea that, he was cooked, that he hadn't been good. And I actually think the contract that he signed indicates that he and his agent believe that there is more money for him to be made and that they think he still has a lot of ability, because he signed a 1-year, $10 million deal instead of the contract that MVS signed, which was 3 years, $30 million. So MVS signs that contract. He's like, all right, I'm in Kansas City. I locked in $30 million. And I think Smith-Schuster rightfully looked at the market and said, Christian Kirk making $21 million, AJ Brown making $100 million, Hollywood Brown making $100 million. Like, one good year with a Hall of Fame quarterback, I'm getting 4 years, $80 million, no problem, right? So I think both the Chiefs, his representation, I think a lot of the signs are actually pointing to the fact that he's got plenty of juice left in the tank. He's probably one of my favorite picks at cost right now. And just look at what he did. 22 years old, 2018 in Pittsburgh, 111 receptions, 1,500 yards, 7 touchdowns, like just unbelievable at 21 and 22 years old. I think if there is a guy who goes from being a 4th, 5th round pick this season to being in the 1st round, early 2nd round next year, kind of this year's Cooper Kupp, I think Smith-Schuster is kind of the obvious guy.
I don't know that I see this one the same way. I gotta be honest. I'm a little worried about what I've seen the last year or so. So we will see. Okay, so Skye Moore is their young rookie who you mentioned they took in the 2nd round, a phenomenal player in college. And look, the Chiefs in general, you would think, Davis, it's like, okay, like, they have several receivers because of Mahomes throwing so many touchdown passes and so many yards, but a lot of this goes to Kelsey, who we'll get to in just a bit. So is Skye Moore someone that you think will be playing for you every week in fantasy this season, or do you think that this is going to take some time?
Well, I think that he got aided a little bit by the injury to Mecole Hardman. Now, Hardman's fine. He's not going to miss any time, but Skye got more repetitions with the first team unit while Hardman and Smith-Schuster have missed a little bit of time. I think probably what ends up happening is Juju Smith-Schuster is the starting slot wide receiver, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the outside wide receiver, and Skye Moore rotates in around those guys. What's kind of interesting in the preseason is that Justin Watson, we might remember him from his time in Tampa Bay. He moved on to Kansas City, signed a 1-year veteran minimum contract with the Chiefs after moving on. He actually has been the outside wide receiver playing with the Chiefs' first unit in the preseason. So, but I would basically compare Skye to some of these elite rookies we've seen in the years past. Justin Jefferson was playing behind Olabisi Johnson for the first couple games of the Viking season. AJ Brown was playing behind Adam Humphries. Like, this is just what happens with rookies. Now, I don't know if Skye Moore is going to be as good as those guys. I would guess he is going to be a very good NFL player. He was absurdly productive as a 18, 19, and 20-year-old at Western Michigan, did well at the combine. And the Chiefs, by the way, in talking after the draft, made it very clear Skye was the guy they wanted all along. They traded up, they configured things around to make sure that they got him. And in fact, part of the reason that you would definitely say this afterward, but the way that Brett Veach made it sound was one of the reasons they felt comfortable trading away Tyreek Hill was they had identified Skye Moore as a guy they thought they could get with the pick that they got from the Dolphins. That's what they ended up doing after trading back and then trading up. I'm very high on him. And I think the great thing about him is if you draft teams the way that I do, where Skye's probably like your 5th or 6th wide receiver, you don't have to start him until you see it. And then once he gets that 70% snap share, 7 target, 100-yard, 1 touchdown game, he goes in your lineup and he doesn't leave.
Yeah, and I think that there's a ton of upside for him there, and he may be my favorite of the receivers, but this is kind of, unfortunately for me, more of a situation, Davis, where I know who the other guys are, and that speaks to the next player that we're going to talk about in Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who had 400 receiving yards last year, 3 touchdowns, and his ADP is 148. He's the 53rd wide receiver taken. And look, I understand your commentary about Rodgers, and if he likes you, he throws to you, and if he doesn't, then he just doesn't. But, I mean, he had the chance in Green Bay for several years and was a big disappointment. I'm not going to be in on this player. I'm sorry.
Yeah, MVS for his career, 17.5 yards per reception, 13 touchdowns on only 247 targets. That would be well above average. And I think, honestly, probably if things work out for the Chiefs how they wanted to, MVS is not going to have that great of a role for fantasy football. Not going to be a guy that you want to start every single week. Now, maybe a guy that you are using as a result of injuries or bye weeks or whatever, because, I mean, kind of in the same way that Hardman hung around, Demarcus Robinson would be rostered in those leagues. I think MVS is better than those guys. But what happens when you remove Tyreek Hill from an offense? I mean, you got to have someone who can take the top off of defenses. You have to be able to create the space for Smith-Schuster, for Travis Kelsey. Andy Reid's offenses are all about the screens. And if you kind of historically look at Andy Reid offenses, they've always had someone like Marquez Valdes-Scantling in that role. And not only the guys who have been great at it, right? So Deshaun Jackson obviously was one of them, Tyreek Hill, but they've also had other guys in that role. I mean, Demarcus Robinson kind of served in that role a little bit last year when they changed Tyreek Hill's role. They started playing Tyreek out of the slot more. Tyreek had the lowest average depth of target of his career. So MVS is probably a guy who matters a little bit more for real football than fantasy football. I have been taking a lot of MVS in best ball leagues. One of the reasons being, I don't think Skye is going to be one of the starting 3 wide receivers to start the year. So wouldn't really be surprising to see MVS have a pretty healthy role maybe the first month of the season.
Okay, that makes some sense. Now, Travis Kelsey is a good conversation to have to bring up, Davis, here on the show today, because it's more of like a tight end conversation than it is even a Kelsey conversation, because obviously he's the best tight end in fantasy. I mean, it's not close. And he's going to win you a league. He's going to win you a week. He's fantastic. But it does come down to the conversation about people who play fantasy. Do you take a tight end in the first round? Do you want to take that pick? Because once you do that, you know that by the time you get to like the 4th, 5th round, you're going to be light somewhere, whether it's running back or wide receiver. And is there a big separation from Kelsey and everyone else this year in Kittle and some of the others? So I guess it's time for us to expand that conversation now that his name has come up.
I mean, I do definitely think there's a huge difference between Travis Kelsey and every other tight end. Travis Kelsey last year, in fact, every year of his career since Patrick Mahomes became the starter in 2018, Travis Kelsey would have finished as a top 12 wide receiver if he was just a wide receiver. So if you go into your draft and you got to take him as a wide receiver, now maybe he would be more, if he was listed at wide receiver, he'd be like a round 2-3 pick instead of a round 1-2 pick or whatever. There is, I think, a little bit of slight concern, though. Travis Kelsey is the oldest first-round pick in fantasy football since Randy Moss. What happened in Randy Moss' age 33 season? He got traded, and then he got cut, and he ended the season playing for the Tennessee. No one even remembers this, but he ended the season playing for the Tennessee Titans. So anytime you start talking about 30-year-old guys, 31, 32, 33, like there just is a natural wall that those guys are going to hit. However, I would say this. I think Kelsey can probably decline athletically, play fewer snaps, be less involved in the red zone. I still don't know if it matters, especially in full-point PPR leagues, because I don't see like the chemistry that Kelsey and Mahomes have is just so great, and that role that Kelsey is going to have in this offense while Mahomes adjusts to Smith-Schuster, MVS, Skye Moore. Like he is the longest tenured Chiefs player on offense right now. He is the guy who's been there with Andy Reid and with Mahomes the longest. In fact, I think the only pass catcher on the roster who would have caught a pass from Alex Smith when Alex Smith was the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. Like that kind of institutional memory for Kelsey, I think he's just locked into 90 receptions, 1,000 yards. I just don't think he can be worse than that unless he gets hurt.
Yeah, it does make sense. All right, did we miss anyone? Is there any other players being drafted, around top 200 to consider?
I mean, I do think McKinnon, he led the Chiefs in snaps at running back in the postseason. He probably is going to be the third down back to start the year for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think he probably does need to be again, especially the way that I draft teams where my running back 2 is always terrible. I think McKinnon could get you by some weeks.
Okay, so there you have it. Our look at the Kansas City Chiefs. One team each day we preview here on the show. We'll have another one tomorrow. And by the way, we archive all of these over on sportsgrid.com and our YouTube channel as well. We got to take a quick time out here on the show. Coming up next, it's time for us to do some fantasy for reality.
Great.
Sports Grid your 24/7 sports wagering network.
They play less games.
The early line.
Take a look at the top 4 seeds here in the Big Ten. They're going to play
Aaron
less.
Rodgers and
The morning
Russell Wilson.
after.
We saw movement in the marketplace like
Orlando
Fantasy
Magic.
sports
The Cleveland
today.
Cavaliers are a little thin as well.
Newswire.
Minus 160 favorite on the money line today for Arizona.
Pharrell coast to
PPG,
coast.
that's where they win cups. They win Stanley Cups over there. Give me the
Game
Penguins.
time
Kind of
decisions.
bizarre when you consider everybody is out for the Warriors.
In-game live
I
all
like
access.
Vandy. I like Vandy against Bama. I think Vandy can win the game, take it 4.5.
In-game live, prime time.
the PGA champion.
In-game live, overtime.
done before the final bet.
Get the winning edge. Only on Sports Grid.
Maurice Allen, 2015-2016 European Long Drive Tour champion, 2017 world number 1. Me personally, I keep my game face on me all the time. Especially coming out of the bunker, leaving the range, or even leaving the course. What's your story?
Pharrell coast to coast.
Do you believe he has the stones to fire both of them? His dad would have.
I don't. I think Boone is safe no matter what happens. Maybe if they don't win the East, but that's almost impossible. So I think he's safe. Cashman's contract, I believe, is up after this year. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I would think he'd be in a lot more trouble than Boone would.
The Sports Grid Network. The early line.
Football is always so much fun because you see new players literally every single year, and the anticipation is stupendous once it gets underway. And we're really close to that. A 12:30 game overseas this weekend between Northwestern and Nebraska. And yeah, you're going to settle into Connecticut playing Utah State with a 27.5-point line. Everybody gets underway. Big Ten, Pac-12. We cannot wait for this.
Only on Sports Grid.
Great.
Welcome back to Fantasy Sports Today here on Sports Grid. For those of you who are on social media, here's an easy way to follow us. Just go to @SportsGrid, @SportsGridTV over on Twitter for the latest news, notes, information, picks against the spread, and obviously we're keeping you updated constantly on what is going on here on our network. We have college football, Davis, getting ready to start on Saturday. Also, the U.S. Open tennis tournament is set to get underway, and Novak Djokovic will not be in the U.S. Open. He is still not vaccinated and cannot enter the United States. That certainly changes the betting odds, I would think, for the upcoming U.S. Open as well.
It definitely does. And I mean, it stinks to not have the best men's player playing, right? We don't cover so much of the politics here, but it does stink. I enjoy the US Open. Nothing in tennis is as good as Wimbledon is. Wimbledon, I pretty much watch it's just on all day from the round of 128 down to the final. And the men's final, by the way, at Wimbledon, Kyrgios Djokovic was I guess probably not an all-timer match, but it was really, really good. But always enjoy the U.S. Open. I would love to go to the U.S. Open someday. Just seems like one of those sporting events that needs to be on everyone's bucket list.
Yeah, very cool over in New York and in Queens, if I'm not mistaken. All right, let's go and hit some fantasy or reality. All right, Davis. Well, naturally, there's been a new team that has been barnstorming around the country. I don't know if you have seen this before, but they are called the Savannah Bananas, and they've played all over the South and even some places in the Midwest as well. Basically, a barnstorming group. It was initially led by Eric Burns, where they, look like a glorified softball team, but they have like a crazy way of playing. They're playing on all these odd fields for sure. Some legends of the game are playing this as well. I know Bill Spaceman Lee, 75 years old, is pitching in this thing. And the whole idea behind the Savannah Bananas is, I guess, to make baseball fun. There's really nothing else except for these dudes just having fun. Fantasy reality, Davis, Banana Ball will be the future of baseball.
Yeah, I mean this is a fantasy. They some of these like independent league barnstorming style things. Like we actually have one in Kansas City. I think they're called the T-Bones. I mean, it's like kind of the same thing as minor league baseball. It's an affordable night out for the family. You go. I mean, it's no different than taking your kids to like the circus or whatever. But would I do this at my stage in life right now? Would I go to a minor league game? Would I go to an independent league game? Like, time is the most finite resource in the world, and I am not spending my time going to barnstorming baseball, independent league baseball. I mean, maybe I would go to see, like if Mike Trout was on a rehab assignment or something like that. Like maybe I would go, but not really all that interested in this. So I got fantasy here.
Sort of stunning that it appeared on ESPN2 the other night. They had live broadcast of the game. I was kind of shocked and wondering like where we're at if this is getting on TV. No offense to the Savannah Bananas. I was just sort of stunned that they were airing a game of theirs. They came here. I did not go. It was in West Palm Beach. I know a lot of people enjoyed it and they said that they had fun doing it. But the other part of this too for me is that, again, it's outside, it's hot in the summer. And this is the time that they're choosing to do this. Now, having not been to one of these, I can't really say for sure if it's the future or not, but I'm going to guess not. And I'm going to say fantasy. Great idea. Anything to bring more fun to baseball, I think is cool. And this idea is cool as well. But yeah, like the thing is at least for my family, the option to go to a major league game or this game, it's probably going to be the major league game, I think, no matter what. All right, let's get to some NFL here. And interestingly enough, a story has been percolating, Davis, here in South Florida, which is the fact that Mike Goseki of the Miami Dolphins, who's a very good pass-catching tight end, may not fit the bill in this new offense that is led by Mike McDaniel, former coach in San Francisco. He likes more of the blocking style tight ends. Now, naturally, they did have George Kittle there too. Goseki played in the entire previous preseason game, which led people to believe that maybe he was on the verge of being traded or being cut, something along those lines. Goseki said no, not the case. He needed to be on the field for the entire second half to kind of know what he needed to do in the offense. So, Davis, McDaniel interviewed today, non-committal, one way or the other, on Goseki. Interesting conversation. Fantasy or reality, Mike Goseki, pretty good tight end, top 10 fantasy tight end, will be traded before the season begins.
Yeah, Craig, normally I'm the one who poo-poos these conversations. We brought up, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf being traded, and I'm like, well, it can't really happen because they count so much against the dead cap. I'm the one to dump water on it. But the way that Goseki is signed to his contract, none of those restrictions apply. His number against the cap, he signed a 1-year, $10 million deal. He counts 1 year, $10 million against the cap. There's no penalty for trading him. There's no penalty for the team that acquires him. It's just, can you get $10 million of cap space? So the problem is I don't really see an obvious trading partner. I mean, there are a couple teams who should be interested in him. I think the Rams should be interested in him because they're playing Gerald Everett at, they're playing Gerald Everett at tight. No, they're playing Tyler Higbee at tight end this year. They had Gerald Everett last year. Higbee's been fine, but Stafford has been so good in 2 tight end sets. He was really good even when, Kendall Blanton was the tight end 2 last year. And they have no obvious third wide receiver right now. Even Van Jefferson is banged up. So I think that's one. Honestly, the Chiefs should maybe be interested with Travis Kelsey being 33 years old. The Bills, they tried to alleviate their problem with tight end, bringing in O.J. Howard. Like, there are a lot of good teams that could use a pass-catching second tight end, especially, $10 million. Like, if Goseki was a wide receiver, he'd make more money than that, right? And it seems like, for whatever reason, the Dolphins and Goseki, they just have never gotten along. I remember going to a Dolphins-Giants game in 2019, Week 16, Eli Manning's last home game, and Goseki just sat by himself on the bench the entire game. I just remember it being very weird. Didn't talk to the quarterback, didn't talk to the OC, just sat by himself on the bench the whole game. It was very, very bizarre to watch. But this is certainly the most realistic trade scenario for the NFL that we have thrown out on the show this offseason.
Yeah, before I answer this question, why is it that Goseki can't play in McDaniel's offense, but Kittle can? What am I missing here? Kittle, great blocker too? Is that what I'm missing?
I mean, that's just what they say. They say Goseki is not a good blocker. I mean, I'm not getting down and grinding the film, but that's just what they say.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, this is reality. I think he's going to be traded. It does seem like everything. Now, I am probably closest to just like being aware of what's going on with the Dolphins than any other NFL team, just because I live here and all the people that I follow and pay attention to are Dolphins writers. And it certainly does seem like they pushed the button today more than ever, Davis, on Goseki, and McDaniel did not answer one way or the other. So whether or not they're in active trade discussions is hard to say. My guess is they are. And that's an interesting point on the cap as well. The one thing that I would guess is that, and again, could be wrong, Davis, I don't think they're going to dump him on a bad team. Like, that would be shocking that some team would just absorb $10 million to not win and take him on the squad. So we'll see. And the Saints, another team, is a possibility. 1 year, $10 million. We'll find out. I got reality. I think that he does get moved. I think you're right, Davis. And I think that for whatever reason, they just don't feel like he can fit in the offense, which is sort of stunning because he was pretty good the last couple of years. All right, let's carve out some time for this story, Davis. Now, in case you missed it, the Oakland Athletics have basically the worst attendance in Major League Baseball by a wide margin. Like, they are averaging 4,000 or 5,000 a game. They're getting less than 2,000 at some games. Yesterday, they only got, I think, 3. If I'm not mistaken, they have torn this thing all the way down to the ground. Like, this is like, I don't know what they're doing, honestly, this year. There are several players in their lineup that, honestly, I have never heard of before. And you know me, Davis, I've heard of all these dudes. There are like 3 guys on their team playing the other day that I just didn't know who they were. So with no one going to the games, there was a couple sitting in the upper deck of the Oakland Stadium, and they were committing an act which they should not have done, and they're looking to find them to be arrested for. It was a sexual act, which we will not get into intimate details. You can Google this anytime you want and find out the story there. Now, since this act occurred, Oakland has now sent security up to the rafters all over the stadium to make sure this does not happen again. Naturally, a lot of fans are running up there now, and they want to take pictures where this all happened. If you don't believe me, this is a true story that this has happened. So, in your mind's eye, of all the things that Oakland has done this year, make trades, play games, win games, lose games, have poor attendance, fantasy reality, Davis, the incident in Oakland was the biggest story of their 2022 season.
So in a roundabout way, I think this is a reality, but it's only because it's a representation of what I think a lot of people like me who are young, don't go to a ton of baseball games, but just kind of theoretically, like, I like baseball. I like having the option to go to a game. And 3,000 people in attendance, it'll never happen in the town that I live in, right? The Cardinals, they could be bad, they could stink, it doesn't matter. The 10,000 people minimum are going to those games on a Wednesday night, right? But teams like the A's, teams like the Royals, teams like the Diamondbacks, teams like the Rockies, who don't really have that, sustained built-in 30, 40 years of success of a fan base. Like, people just don't care, especially because, and this is very inside baseball, but like going to the A's stadium stinks. You have to take the BART. It's far away from the city. So like if you live in San Francisco, you're never going. If you live across the bay, it's still a little bit difficult to figure out. So in a way, it's just like some of these baseball institutions just seem like they're going to decay and go away. Like, I totally get why this team would be moving to Las Vegas, because like, what's left for them in Oakland if 3,000 people are going to their games? Like, what's the point?
Yeah. I think them trading Frankie Montas or maybe Sean Manaea in spring training was a bigger story than this. So I'm going to say fantasy. but it does speak to sort of the desolate nature that is that stadium. I have been there too, Davis, and I've gone to games there as well. They have a very rich history, and by the way, a tradition of success in the last 10, 20 years of, even with very little talent, building it up to be competitive. But honestly, I have no idea what they're doing right now, man. Like this does seem like they're putting themselves in a position to move. It does. It feels a lot like that. So I'm going to say fantasy. Their trades that they made, I think, stick out to me more than anything else. But the team that they are running out there, similar to Washington, but you know what, Washington's path is clear, and they just came off a World Series, and they just got a haul back for Juan Soto. What in the world is going on with the Oakland Athletics, man? And how bad is this going to get over the next few years? I think it's a big problem. I got fantasy anyway, but the story definitely will live on in infamy for sure in Major League Baseball. All right, we got to take a quick break here on the show. We got the Sports Grid 60 coming up next, and then Kevin and Donnie coming up at the top of the hour. I'm right back here with you at 2 o'clock Eastern for Newswire as we close in on the upcoming college football season this Saturday. We have it covered for you, in-game live all access, all day, all night Saturday. From a betting perspective, we'll be able to keep you involved on all of your wagers, props, and everything else. And naturally, with college football starting, a lot of our coverage starting to cover college football as well. So stay on the grid for that as we come back and wrap it up with the Sports Grid 60. And then we say so long for the day. But we're right back here tomorrow, by the way, 11 o'clock Eastern, another team preview for fantasy football for those of you who are drafting this weekend as well. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Great.
The early line.
This non-story is officially over. Tom Brady went away. Why? Because he can. He's Tom Brady. His wife, very publicly, has wanted him to retire. He did, and then he unretired. So, in a meaningless week of practice, he went out and was able to spend some time with his family. Make sure that everything is good. It was reported to be a work-life balance. It was reported that the Bucs knew it was coming.
Only on Sports Grid. Your heart's racing. The clock's running out. It all comes down to this. We're talking pregame. Pregame. Get locked in with Game Time Decisions. Your hosts, Gabe Morency and Cam Stewart, will get you ready for game time. Everything you need to know before a game goes off the board, with the bet slips to back it up. Make your best bet with live odds updates, late breaking news, up-to-the-minute injury reports, and real-time analytics from inside the sportsbooks. All the odds, all the action, from sports wagering insiders and industry pros like Donnie Rightside, Cam Lou, Cousin Sal, the Pro Football Doc, Dr. David Chow, and more. Get the winning edge every weekday afternoon from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, 3 to 4 Pacific. It's Game Time Decisions. Only on Sports Grid. The morning after.
Who wins the American League Central?
I recently had a change of heart here, and it's the Cleveland Guardians. I think that the Guardians are going to win the American League Central. I think that what they do in terms of offensive depth, I know we talked about that with Houston a couple weeks ago. I think that Cleveland runs out an incredibly deep lineup. I also think that they run out a very solid front three in that rotation with Shane Bieber, Tristan McKenzie, and Cal Quantrill.
The Sports Grid Network. Fantasy Sports Today.
Michael Pittman did put together somewhat of an impressive season. He ended up being wide receiver 13 in fantasy. I guess what owners are hoping for based on his positional rank going into this year is that he just is a little bit more consistent. And honestly, where he's being drafted, giving you about, 15 to 20% more numbers, about 1,200 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns.
The Sports Grid Network.
As a reminder, I'll be right back here with you for the Thursday edition of Newswire. That's 2 o'clock Eastern, right here on Sports Grid. Before we get out of here, let's turn it over to Davis. He's got today's Sports Grid 60.
Well, we did baseball yesterday, and we're doing football today, but not the football you're thinking of, European football. We are, I believe, 10 days away from the transfer deadline over in the major European leagues, and very similar to the NBA trade deadline and the NBA offseason. Like, the things that people love the most about global football is the transfer deadline, the crazy news, their favorite players moving the teams. My favorite team, Aston Villa, definitely needs to make a move. We will see if they will, but it's all leading up to, Craig, I just am getting so excited for November when we have the World Cup, we have basketball returning, and we're going to have the NFL getting close to the playoffs. We are in store for a truly magical next 6 months of sports. Women's World Cup happening immediately after that as well.
Yep, I'm looking forward to that. One other part that I'm looking forward to is my upcoming fantasy football draft, which are starting next week. But the one thing that must happen in the NFL before we draft in fantasy football, which is why you really should be waiting, is the chaos. It is coming because the cuts are going to come fast and furious over the next 7 to 10 days, and players that you drafted on your fantasy football team, maybe in the 9th, 10th round, are going to get cut, and you didn't expect it. And this is sort of the nature of the NFL. It doesn't really happen in a lot of other sports like this, even in Major League Baseball at the end of spring training. There's only a couple of guys usually that don't make teams and get DFA'd, but it's going to happen in the NFL, and it's going to happen soon. Don't be surprised if you need to make a pickup before week 1. That'll do it for our show today. Thanks, of course, to LTN and our great graphics department. For my producer, Brett Levy, and co-host, David Maddock, I'm Craig Mish. A reminder, coming up next is the early line with Kevin and Donnie, followed by Newswire at 2 o'clock Eastern. So I'm off for a couple hours, then I'll be right back here with you hosting, and I hope to see you then. Until then, have a great day, everyone. See ya.
Great.